I'm Trish.
I'm Rebeka.
And I'm Carrie.
And this is the Kickbutt Talent Series.
Brought to you by the Sioux Film Festival.
Hello, I'm Trish. In this episode, I get the chance to discuss the mysterious world of grant writing with our very own Rebeka Herron. Enjoy!
Hello, Rebeka.
Hello.
By now, I'm sure the audience and viewers and filmmakers know that you are a producer, but if they do not,
Yep.
you are a producer.
Among many other things, yes.
So one of the common things that you do as a producer is write grant applications.
That is true. Yeah.
How did you first get into writing grants, and how did that go when you had to tackle your very first grant?
Well, there are two types of producers, I would say. There are the producers who like to work with soft money and grants, and then there are the producers who work with private equity, which is like people's money, like your dentist or your lawyer friend or some random stranger out there. And oftentimes, yes, you do have a combination of those to make a movie. But I personally don't like to ask people for their hard-earned money to make a movie. I go find grant money. So I started writing grants, actually not that long ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh.
In my early days, we mostly just found a way to make a movie.
Where there's a will, there's a way. Like
Yeah.
you said in the interview with Stephanie, that you turned your mom's house into a post-apocalyptic
Yeah,
zone.
exactly. I mean, back then in my early days, I was making mostly short films. So those were, a bunch of us friends writing together and collabing together, and maybe we would get like a contest win where we had like some free gear or something, and we'd be like, okay, yes, let's make a thing. Like, what are you doing next weekend? Let's do it,
Get the gear.
Yeah, exactly, get the gear. But as I sort of have focused more on filmmaking and like producing and directing and writing, I realized that if I want to make some of my own content, that I need to start finding money myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of is what led me down to grant writing. I've now kind of surpassed some of the grant writing as part of my day job as at the animation studio I work for.
And what's your position at the animation studio?
I'm their line producer and production supervisor for all of their shows. So my job is to write funding applications and grants and deal with business affairs all day, every day.
So you're probably doing it in your sleep.
Pretty much.
Or just not sleeping.
Pretty much.
And writing them all night from your bed and just not sleeping.
Yesterday, I submitted a funding application down to the minute before it was due because life is crazy, and for a project we're working on.
Yeah, you got it in.
I got it in, and that's...
Race to the finish line.
Yeah, but that was 1 out of 3 grants I submitted that day.
Yeah, that's intense.
And I would say that at this point, like, we're only in November. I know it's almost the end of the year, but I still have, for the rest of the year, I still have about 20 grants to write.
Wow, so that really puts it into perspective for filmmakers out there who haven't written a grant, are wondering how to get to that next level of funding, and are curious if they should write a grant. For your first grant, what would you suggest doing? Writing it on your own or hiring someone to facilitate?
I think you need a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Grant writing is one of those things that's a bit complicated, just because each grant or funding application is specific and tailored to that individual funder. Mm-hmm. So they look for certain things, and their criteria ranges depending on the grant. So having somebody who can sort of mentor or help you in your first grant I think is important. I mean, when you're writing the first grant, trust me, it's going to take you at least 80 hours.
Wow.
Like, it is a full-time job to be a grant writer. Like, that is my day job, basically. So, it gets easier as you go, especially if it's like the more funding applications you write for a project, the easier they become because you have all this material you've already written and put together. But the first one usually takes us at least 40 to 80 hours to write.
Yeah, now that you say it like that, I'm thinking, okay, trying to calculate all those days, but it just becomes one big blur of, okay, when's the deadline? When do you have time? When do you have time? Okay, let's meet up this day, work on it, and you just keep cracking away.
Yeah, like Sunday, we worked together for 6 hours writing grants and getting things organized. And
I think we submitted 2 that day.
Yeah.
2 different projects, but completely, I think, started that day and got them completed and submitted. But because we had
previous grant applications written for those projects, we were able to do that.
Yeah, and then you save I learned this all from Rebeka, how you save all of your answers into files, very neatly foldered files on Google Drive.
Yes.
And then you can...
Google Drive is my life. I have an organized Google Drive mess, and my work even dislikes me for it, but that's just how I operate, especially in our collaboration kind of business. And when I'm working with other clients, it's just so much easier to kind of be like, here's the Google Drive folder, here's all the things you need for this grant. You guys can start working on stuff that's more personal for the grant, and I can start working on all of the other technical and business affairs type things for the grant. So each grant, has a lot of pieces together. Like, for example, if I'm putting together a Canada Council grant versus a telefilm grant, those are 2 different types of questions, types of letters, types of...
It might require different budgets, right? Doesn't telefilm have a specific
style of budget? Yeah, template. And so all of these things you're having to think about when you're writing grants. And honestly, it sounds intimidating.
It is.
But after you start to do a couple of them...
Yeah, it becomes a lot less painful. And I know the first time I looked over grants, I just couldn't even understand the wording. Yeah. And I thought, where do we start with this? How do you get letters from people committing to it? How do you get funding? How do you come up with funding to get the funding? I didn't know how to do it. How do you do a budget? And then you guided, you're who I've learned, you were my mentor still, as my producing partner. So I learned it all from you, and I'm still learning all the time through each grant that we do. So I see how a mentor is very important. Yeah. Because until you came along, I was looking at those grants like, I don't even understand English.
Yeah. But, I mean, there are fundamentals to writing grants. I mean, a grant is always going to ask you for your team's resume. That's always going to be asked. So always keep your resumes updated. If not, I have learned to make resumes for people very fast.
Yes.
Because
made mine a lot better.
Just because it's part of the grant writing system, and the funders want to know who you are, and they want to know, can they trust that you're going to, take their money and actually finish and make something? So they want to see your track record, and the way to do that is for them to see your resume. So make sure that your resume is well put together. And I know sometimes resumes are hard to make, so if you need to ask help with either your mentor or someone who makes resumes for a living, like, that is something that I think you should invest in.
Yeah, and it seems like such a simple thing to have, but I think it is one of those things that everyone kind of leaves on the back burner, updating their resume.
Yeah, and then the other one is your bio. Often grants will ask for either a resume or a bio or both, and so constantly upgrading your bio. And I have a hard time writing my biography, and actually I often ask my friend who's a writer to write my biography, because I have such a hard time bragging about myself that it's much easier if somebody else writes your bio, I find. So like a trusted friend or your producing partner, or if you I think that's sometimes a nicer way. And then if it's like, I'll write yours, you write mine. It kind of like allows you to see a different perspective of yourself that you might not see when you're writing a bio for yourself. So that's something that's like a trick that I found for some filmmakers.
Even with making your resume, I know sometimes when you went over my resume with me, when we were submitting for some grants, you said, why don't you have this on here? Why don't you have this on here? You have this award. So your friend is going to see your accomplishments more clearly than you often do yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's good to have that perspective because the funder is going to look at those things and go, oh, yes, I definitely am interested in Trish because she has this experience, that experience. Oh, she won an award for this project. Oh, that's amazing. You know, oh, that project aired here or there. And so that's important to show in your applications. And then, of course, the other big thing, which is why any of us write a grant, is the creative part. So that's, you know, synopses. And usually we would have synopses in varying word count. Because often grants will ask for a synopsis, a page, 50 words, 500 words. So having a varying degree of synopsis in your roster of while you're writing your project and thinking about what your project is about, I think is important to do. And I think that's important to do before you even get to the grant writing stage, because only you and your team know the creative of the project. So when I get something from a client and I'm starting from scratch and they don't have any kind of synopsis, it's a bit of a struggle. And it takes us a long time to get to a place where we both feel comfortable having the right creative to apply for the grant. And if you are, you know, going from scratch, that 80 hours is going to add up, and you are going to actually need all those 80 hours. Whereas if you have some of those resources and thinking about those as you're creating the project ahead of time, that's going to cut down on your grant writing time. Yeah. And then things like lookbooks and Bibles and treatments are also something that are very important when you're grant writing, especially when it comes to feature films and television series. Because the funder will want to see what the overall goal and plan is for the project, and they want to see like that it has some marketability, right? And the only way to do that is kind of to show comparable projects that are already out in the markmarketplace. So that's something to think about too while you're developing your show. And we do that all the time. Whenever it's like, oh, I have an idea, I'm like,
then we start making
the
Bible and which contains all the you know, season arcs, possible season arcs, and photos and summaries and log lines and
so that is honestly the first place I would start too. Get yourself organized, and then get your project organized creatively as well. So that helps somebody like me as a grant writer go in and be like, oh, here's the material, I can do my job, right? Then the other fun thing is budgeting. And as you mentioned, like different funding bodies have different budget templates that they like you to use, and some are more confusing than others. But there are a few options. Like I'm a producer and I'm a line producer, so I do budgets all day in my sleep. But there are people you can hire as well to help you with budgets, who you can hire to like break down your script and budget it. That often happens early, actually, in development or pre-production, before pre-production. So even if you don't have a line producer on your project or a production manager on your project, or you can hire somebody to break down your script and budget it for you in advance. That actually happens a lot.
And then what is that person's position called? How could someone seek out that person?
You could honestly ask a line producer to help you break down and budget your film. That's
so even if they're not attached to that project,
you could hire them.
Hey, I know you're a line producer. Could I hire you for a few hours or however long it would take, a couple weeks, to break down the script and come up with a budget?
That happens a lot, actually. So, or you could find a mentor who is a line producer, production manager, who has those skills, and they could help you learn to like budget your film.
Right, so they could sit with you and do it. Like
we did with Emre, right? Like so. But those are sort of the key fundamental components of any kind of grant or funding application. And then it's sort of a matter of really reading the guidelines. I cannot express, and this still happens to me because I write so many that sometimes I like gloss the guidelines and I'm like, oh crap, I forgot this one thing.
Yeah.
Because guidelines change every year and sometimes every season. So reading, I know they're tedious, but reading guidelines is important. Some of them are like 20 pages.
And sometimes if you miss something, they won't give you a chance to submit it afterwards.
Yeah.
Or to fix that. And then some are better with emailing and saying, hey, we need more information from you. We need this. We've forgotten this. And some will just say, nope, disqualified.
Yeah. Another thing is we're lucky here that a lot of the funding bodies have like days where they will have a ask me questions thing, so that prospective producers and grant writers can go into these like webinars now and ask questions to the grant funders about the new guidelines or what they're looking for this year. So that's something that I also stress, that if you have the time to do that, to sign up to any of these questionnaires with the funders, because it does help to know like what they're looking for, because often a lot of times filmmakers are like, oh, I submitted, but they never said anything. And it's like, well, did you submit a project they would be interested in? Which is also something to think about too. And then the opposite, if your project gets denied, oftentimes there are some grants where you can ask them for feedback. So always ask for feedback, because that will tell you what you were missing and if you can apply again the next round. And so you can fix all of the things that they were iffy on or they had questions on, and then you can apply again. So I would suggest that too. Yeah.
Another thing I'm just thinking of that is important to have when you apply for a grant is a corporation. And a lot of indie filmmakers transitioning from, producing short films that are maybe self-funded, where they're using their own resources or a school's resources. When you go into writing your first grant, you're going to need to have a registered production company.
Yeah. Yes. Yay, we're approved for our grant. Amazing. And you're going to now sign over your life to this grant, because they're going to give you a giant contract that's sometimes 100 and something pages that lays out all of the grant paperwork, all of the things you need to report to them, how your payment structure is going to be, all that. But then what you get to do is your line producer or your business affairs person or your accountant, depending on the size of your project, or the producer, will call up the bank and say, hey, great news, we got this funding, we have an agreement, it's been signed, can you interim finance this for us? And that basically means that you're taking the grant money that's promised to you and going to the bank and getting a loan. And so that while you are waiting for the money to come in, the bank will give you the money instead. So that when you get the money from the grant, you pay the bank back. So oftentimes in budgets, we have a line item in the budget that says interim financing, and that's literally to pay for the interest that we're paying to the bank so that we can make the movie, which sounds ridiculous, but that's how it works when we're working with grant money and soft money. So this is the same with tax credits. So if we were going to get money for tax credits, and that's the labor credit you would get back for working, with somebody from Ontario or who's Canadian, we would take our tax credit estimates and also take those to the bank, and they would finance those usually between 75% and 90% of the tax credit. So the bank becomes your best friend, and I know that's scary for a lot of filmmakers. They're like, oh no, now I'm in giant debt. Like, kind of. Because these government bodies of funding exist, the bank knows of them very, very well, and they know that they're kind of like a guarantee to get paid back to the bank. So it's not as scary as you might think. I mean, you will definitely need to have like a guarantor when you go to the bank, and you may have to say, I own a house, and if I screw up this movie, my house is now yours. But hopefully you have a good team together that's not going to happen.
You often do hear producers talking about, well, thought I was going to lose my house with that one. Yeah. And that's what they're talking about.
That is exactly what they're talking about.
It's a very common thing to hear.
It is.
Amongst producers.
Yes, it is. But it's also one of those things where if you start small and build a rapport with the bank, then there's less need for them later to kind of like scrutinize you and like make you have this giant checklist of information that you're going to need to give over.
Right. So each time they will see, okay, they paid up last time, so it becomes less intrusive each time.
Yeah, and they will also start to think, oh yeah, okay, Trisha's, we have a great working relationship. She's had this project. Her budgets keep getting bigger. That's good.
More money for the bank.
And so it's relationship building as well.
That keeps coming up in all of the workshops. Relationship building.
It's true. But I mean, I love the guys that I work with at the bank. They are really nice people, and they understand the industry, and a lot of them have worked in the industry as producers and line producers in the past, so they know how we feel as producers when we go to the bank and go,
you're terrified.
Please, please say yes. Please help me.
I've been working on this project for 2 years.
Yes, so they know what it's like, which is very helpful. But yeah, interim financing is something that every producer at some point in their life is going to have to understand, and it is scary at first, and you are signing a lot of paperwork, but that's normal in a producer's life. And you know, as a producer, you own this project. Like, that project is your baby. It's your child. Like, you are going to own that thing, and you're going to see it grow and develop, and you're going to be with that project for like 25 years.
Yeah.
You know,
so it doesn't go away.
It doesn't go away because a film has so many cycles of its life, right?
Yes.
Like, you make it, that's literally like it going from like 0 to 1 year old. Yeah. It's just making the film, and then there's the life after that. So as a producer, it's not just one and done. I shot it and I'm done, and it's done, and I never have to worry about it. It's like, no, that is your child.
I see a lot of films resurfacing now that maybe I had the chance to work on and didn't end up working on, or whatever, as an actor a few years ago, and I see a lot of them coming out now, and I'm like, oh, that was made? And it's just because sometimes it takes so long, and I think now with COVID, so many streaming platforms and distributors are taking new content, so a lot of the new content is content that people had maybe sitting on a hard drive and they didn't have distributed before. So now a lot of older projects are becoming new again and having this whole new life.
Yeah, which is great. It's great to see. And maybe if there are, you know, streaming platforms that are willing to give advances and MGs to filmmakers, that will also help with your grant applications as well. Because oftentimes, a finance plan for a movie is not one funder. It's several funding possibilities, from tax credits to government bodies to mom and dad, her friend, someone else's friend.
Yeah, we've had a lot of, I was surprised in the grant process, writing with you, I was surprised at how you come up with funding and some of the things that count as funding. Yeah. Having a letter from someone giving you in-kind locations or saying they will waive the fee of letting you shoot in their houses, for example. Things like that can help you in your application for the grant. So getting, sourcing, talking to business owners, and asking them to write you support letters and saying that you can shoot at their location for this many days, which would equal this amount of money.
Yeah.
And then that can count as
funding
that you do have going into the grant. So it teaches you learn to see everything for a value. And you learn that even your own time is valued, so you can defer your fees and that sort of thing, and put that as a donation
back into the project.
Back into the project from you.
And the other thing too is like when you are working on your budget, there's also a category in the budget called development. And so in that category, there is line items for things like budget breakdown. So actually there is a line where you can pay yourself to do the budget. And oftentimes what we do is we defer it until we get the production money. So, there's also like office fees in development. There are research, there is concept art, there's a lot of fees where, depending on the size of your project, you can put into your budget.
And then get paid back for all of your hard work for the last however many months or years.
And that's the other thing too, I think, is that a lot of filmmakers don't realize that if we're going down the soft money way, that it sometimes takes years to get a project funded. And yes, private equity sometimes takes years too. They both do, but I think filmmakers think, oh, I'm writing a grant, I've got it like tomorrow. But it's not like that at all, because every single piece of the puzzle has to fit together to finance a project.
And sometimes you're waiting on, say we have a grant reach out who says, hey, we're really interested in this project. Have you heard back from this other grant? And then we say, no, we haven't heard back from that grant yet. So then we have to take that project and now withdraw and then wait till next year when their next
cycle is to apply.
And then apply for that and hopefully have heard back from that grant by then. And sometimes, you just hear back later than you expect to hear back. And then it ends up, then you're on that project 6 months behind what you thought you were going to be.
Or you're refinancing, where you hear back from a grant and they go, yes, we got it. You got this grant, but you didn't get that grant. And so now you're like, oh crap, now I have to
come up with $250,000.
Or you have to relook at your budget and pare back and then tell that funder who is giving you the money how you're going to make this project work with just their money. Yeah. And that happens a lot too.
And there's a way.
There is a way. There's always a way, I find, unless we're making like a Disney Marvel movie. Like, no, then we need the dollars.
But for example, on a $800,000 feature, you could cut out some scenes that have stunts in them, or to cut back on money or budget.
Or I was talking with Heidi today about a project where this director wants to, in the script, there's a scene where the farm burns down, and
that's gotta go.
And it may not gotta go. It doesn't have to necessarily go, but it's when you have to think, okay, how can I shoot this in a way that still captures that specific moment we're trying to capture in that scene, but on a smaller budget, right? So like maybe we build a miniature and set that on fire, versus and green screen our characters and comp them in. Maybe we talk to locals and see if they have a barn that they want to get rid of, and we can just burn it.
Burn it for free.
There are things that you can kind of think about, and also like, practicing and like learning about all the different techniques that are out there, but also talking to your team about sort of the different budget constraints that can happen. So like if we're thinking, oh, this is going to be $1 million movie. Awesome. So we're all thinking $1 million. This is what we can do. And then we come back and, oh, guys, sorry. We only got $750. So now the team has to think of, okay, well, what can we pare back? What can we do?
You could go swimming. There you have it.
Google was definitely listening to my interview there. That's amazing.
There you go. We could go swimming.
We could go swimming instead.
It's things that, hey, she's just, this was our actress we hired tonight to come in and show you what a production team would do. You would get the writers and you would get the producers and you'd get everyone just brainstorm. You say, okay, what could we cut back on? What could we change? In that scene, instead of going in a submarine, they just go swimming, just at a beach.
Exactly. But yeah, so it's also one of those things where we're always having to be flexible and work within our means. And I know that sounds kind of sad and depressing, but it's just the nature of business. But hey,
then you get to make the project. And no one watching the project is going to know what could have been or what you had in your head. So to you, instead of looking at it like, well, we could have had this and could have had this, no one's ever going to miss that because they didn't know you could have had that.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, and that's the kind of fun thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so grants are a lot of work, but honestly, as much, I know I write so many grants and I don't always get them. Like, I'm writing hundreds of grants a year.
And how many have you gotten to date?
I don't know. I've lost count, honestly.
But that's a good sign.
It's a good sign.
That means there's a lot.
Yeah, it's a good sign. But also, just knowing that it is a process and it is a job and it does take time and it's a skill and you do have to like practice at it and find a team that can help you with it. I mean, it's definitely easier to write a grant with somebody else than to write one by yourself, especially since a lot of the time it's good to have somebody review your work for grammar or just like making sure that you're saying the right thing, because you can kind of get lost sometimes in grant writing.
Oh, yeah, when you're staring at the same questions and answers in the screen.
Yeah.
Just even taking a little break.
Yeah, and that's why...
do some push-ups and drink a tea and then come back with fresh eyes.
Yeah,
and then you'll be like, I spelled my own name wrong.
But that's why I try to write a list of all of the grants that I'm going to apply for at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And so that I can kind of map out the timing throughout the year.
That's how you always know. Because every time I come over to Rebeka's... So this grant is due on this day, so we could start applying for what project you want to apply for this thing. This is coming up next. This is coming up next. And I'm like, how do you know what all these grants are? Well, I know it's your job, so that makes sense. But also that makes a lot of sense that's a really good way to do it. So that you're not just
you don't
willy-nilly.
Yeah, and you don't get overwhelmed, right? So
I got it
mapped out. Yeah. Yeah.
I learned something new. Lots of new things, as well as, see people listening. So thank you for listening. Anything you'd give, any advice you'd give to aspiring producers?
I think try to find a mentor, and I know that's hard to say, and I've had my struggles with mentors, but it's important to find somebody you like working with and find somebody who has, even if it's just someone who you can call to ask questions to about this kind of things. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to find one mentor for everything, because not every producer is skilled at everything. You are a jack of all trades, but there are some producers who I would ask questions about grant writing or ask about, writing agreements or ask about casting or packaging. So your mentor doesn't have to be one person. They can be several people. And I think that's also something to think about as a producer, because there's so many different aspects of producing. Yeah.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for chatting.
Thanks for having me.
In your house.
In my house. At our festival.
At our festival. I mean, we're at the festival.
Yes.
Smoke and mirrors.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. Follow us at Sioux Film Festival on the social medias.